Our story begins with the fact that in Indonesia, namely on the island of Kundra, the main character named Kong Chan was on an operation to free hostages, and he had been lying in the bushes for 4 hours. After a long time, the guy notices something in the sight of his sniper rifle, and as soon as Kong Chan activated the thermal imager, he saw pirates approaching him with weapons in their hands. In total, the main character counted 6 people. At the same time, the pirates walked carefully and inspected the area. Suddenly, our hero was told over the earpiece that his squad had already completed rescuing the hostages, and therefore, all the military were moving to the exit. The comrades continued to talk into the earpiece, and now they handed over to Kong Chan, their meeting place. At the same time, the pirates came closer and closer to the guy. The main character never took his eyes off them for a moment. And in the end, the situation became more and more terrible, because Kong Chan was gradually surrounded by pirates. After a few seconds, the guy was already clearly able to look at the enemy's legs without his scope. Taking off his night vision goggles, Kong Chan began to panic a little, because there were too many enemies. Having taken off all his equipment, our hero began to wait for the moment when the bandits would pass by him. The pirates came closer and closer to Kong Chan, without noticing his presence. When the pirate's foot was already a few meters from our hero, Kong Chan took out his hunting knife just in case. When the knife was ready, the guy begged fate for the villains to pass him by. After a second, the guy holds his breath and waits for the pirates to pass by him. Our hero was overwhelmed with various feelings. He was incredibly scared to even take a breath, but thanks to this, more than half of the pirates had already passed by him. As soon as the villains walked a few meters, the main character calmly exhaled and calmed down. But, unfortunately, it was at that moment that someone again repeated the meeting place into his earphone. In a panic, Kong Chan turns to the side past the passing pirate, and he sees how a man with a weapon in his hands was staring at him. At this moment, Kong Chan stands up on adrenaline in a matter of seconds, and miraculously dodging 2 bullets, the guy takes out a knife prepared in advance. And with a precise swing of a hunting knife, the main character easily destroys one of the pirates. All these screams and squeals are heard by the pirates' friends. The 3 of them turn around sharply and see someone beating their comrade. The men immediately released the safety on their machine guns and began firing hundreds of bullets directly into the back of Kong Chan, who was running away from them. The main character, miraculously dodging bullets, looks back and remembers what is in place. He left the pirates a small gift in the form of mines. Without thinking twice, Kong Chan activates the explosive devices using a remote control, and at the same moment, the mines explode, taking with them the lives of the remaining villains. The comrades hear all this noise. They asked our hero whether he was in battle. Like a true commander, Kong Chan asked his comrades to leave the island while he distracted the pirates. The soldiers did not want to leave the island without Kong Chan, but he insisted, saying that it was an order. At the same time, our hero had 2 remaining pirates on his tail, who really wanted to take the sniper's life. Kong Chan ran away, and at the same time, he convinced his team to fly away, because soon they could also be found. As a result, the soldiers agreed, and the helicopter with them on board left the island against the backdrop of a burning forest from a mine explosion. A few days later, Kong Chan still survives and finds shelter. The guy settled in a small and bright cave in the rock. Every time he panicked, he looked out from the hole and saw whether there was anyone near his hiding place. As soon as Kong Chan was sure of his safety, he exhaled with relief and leaned against the smooth surface of the cave. As it turned out, the 4th day had already passed, and all this time, the main character did not sleep. Also, these pirates could not approach him. After all this time, Kong Chan was able to kill 6 people with a sniper rifle. But even this did not give him a chance of salvation, because the villains chose a wait-and-see tactic. And therefore, the only way to get out is another rescue operation. Also, the guy understood that if he fell asleep, he would be finished. To somehow relieve the tension, Kong Chan takes out a family photo, and then, he begins to look at it and remember his relatives. At that moment it was hard for the guy. He didn't know whether his parents, as well as his girlfriend, would be able to wait for him. Suddenly, the entire atmosphere is interrupted by a sudden and loud sound. Turning his head towards the mountain, the guy saw several people standing on it. Having looked more closely, the main character saw one of the pirates aiming at him with a rocket launcher. This scared Kong Chan incredibly, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt panic that he couldn't control. The guy quickly took all the weapons with him and began to think about what he should do and what he should do. But there was incredibly little time, because the pirate did not drag his feet and fired a shell directly at the soldier. Our hero looked with despair at the approaching rocket launcher shell, and at the last moment of his life, the guy began to scream, because he realized that it was absolutely impossible to escape from this. But even despite the fear and despair, our hero still decides to somehow try to escape from this hopeless situation. He began to run away into the depths of the cave from the fast-flying projectile. As soon as there were a few seconds left before the projectile hit the ground, Kong Chan made the last jump. And immediately after that, the shell exploded. From the force of the explosion, the main character was thrown back, along with weapons and supplies, began to be thrown throughout the cave. And at some point, the guy flew into the hole that was at the end of the cave. And as soon as Kong Chan managed to get there, the passage gradually began to be filled with fragments of stones. A few minutes later, our hero comes to his senses, and the first thing he does is reach for the machine gun in order to protect himself in case of danger. But as soon as the guy was fully aware, in front of him he saw a statue of a sitting demon, who was looking intently at him. Kong Chan was perplexed as he looked at the sculpture, but after that, his strength left him, and our hero completely lost consciousness. As soon as the guy passed out, the cave began to collapse, and stones fell from the ceiling. At this moment, the eyes of the demon statue glowed with bright red fire. After some time, the main character comes to his senses. Having fully woken up, our hero begins to look at everything around him. And around him there was darkness, and scattered weapons and equipment. Kong Chan thought for a while, and then, like a wild predator, he pounced on the weapon. Grabbing the machine gun, Kong Chan hides behind a nearby rock. He shook his head nervously and asked himself how long he had been unconscious. Suddenly, the wounds from the rocket launcher made themselves felt. Feeling incredible pain in his shoulder, our hero lets go of the weapon and grabs his hand. As soon as he was distracted, he again saw in front of him the statue of a sitting demon, who was still watching him intently. But this time, all the jewelry he was wearing was gold, and his eyes and whole body were shining red. Recalling recent events, Kong Chan tries to remember whether this statue was here before. But, nevertheless, our hero realized that now, there was no time for this. Peering out of the stone, the soldier begins to look at the light from the hole he fell into earlier. Looking at all this, Kong Chan remembers that he has a walkie-talkie with him, and therefore, he decides to contact his squad again. Without thinking twice, our hero collects his things. Having collected all his equipment, he finally looked at the demon statue. The guy was wondering where something like that was on this island. But, without paying much attention to this statue, the guy continues to walk and get out of the cave. As soon as the main character looked outside, his face immediately changed. Shock and horror overtook him, and inside his heart began to beat even faster. After all, in front of him, the soldier saw a completely different world. A world in which incredibly tall trees grew, and it was also very bright and full of colors. Everything around was as if in a dream. Kong Chan was shocked by all this, but when he looked up, he was even more surprised, because in the sky, the guy saw two bright and warm suns. Out of shock, Kong Chan took the compass to see where he was. But when the guy looked at him, he saw how the compass needles were going crazy. She didn't stop spinning. Looking at this landscape, the soldier absolutely did not understand what was happening and where he was. With all this information, our hero goes downstairs. And then he sits down and begins to think that this is all a dream, looking at the compass again, and then, to the creepy demon statue. The soldier calms down and realizes that he is stuck here for a long time. At this moment, our hero begins to look for something in his backpack. And at this time, some kind of monster was crawling behind him. Kong Chan decided to look at his backpack and see what supplies he had left. As the monster gradually approached our hero, he laid out various objects from his backpack. A few minutes later, the main character pulled out a special tablet. Kong Chan tried to turn it on, but it didn't do anything because the device was dead. And when our hero tried to somehow force him to work, at that moment a giant snake was crawling over him. Then, the guy continued to pull out everything that was left in the backpack. As a result, our hero had weapons, as well as various supplies, but Kong Chan did not know whether these cartridges would be enough for him to continue to survive. And therefore, our hero decided to save ammunition, and if there was none left, he would fight hand to hand. Suddenly, behind his back, our hero felt someone's presence. As it turned out, behind the guy there was an incredibly large and scary snake. When Kong Chan turned around, horror and shock appeared on his face. The snake didn't care about the guy's emotions. Without thinking twice, it shot at him with its incredibly thin and blade-sharp tongue. Thanks to his quick reaction, the main character was able to easily dodge the monster's very fast attack. As soon as Kong Chan landed, he took a position and took aim at the monster with his machine gun. But the monster's next action surprised the frightened guy a little. He looked at the snake and saw that it was looking at his machine gun with surprise and fear. Then the snake hissed strangely, and after a few seconds, she, having forgotten about all fears, began to attack the main character again. The guy did not panic. He took good aim and pointed the muzzle of his machine gun right at the monster's tongue. And as soon as Kong Chan waited for the perfect opportunity, he immediately began to shoot and damaged the snake's tongue. Fortunately, all the bullets fired hit the target, and now the monster's tongue was damaged. From such a counterattack, the snake began to wriggle and writhe in unbearable pain. And suddenly, the monster accidentally touched the soldier with its tail. From such a sudden blow, Kong Chan was thrown several meters away. When he finally stopped, he thought that this monster was not taken by bullets, and that it would be almost impossible to defeat it. In these thoughts, the guy accidentally turns his head, and in his area, a sniper rifle conveniently lay. The soldier, without thinking twice, began to run towards her and try to pick her up. Fortunately, our hero succeeds, and as soon as the weapon was in his hands, he immediately took aim and made an accurate shot, which hit the snake right in its strong head. After the hit, the guy did not begin to rejoice. He again took up the position and continued to hold the monster at gunpoint. The snake was incredibly angry because of this. But just as she wanted to attack the soldier again, something stopped her at the last moment. It seems that she felt an unknown force that came from the main character. Having overcome his fear, the monster tried to intimidate the concentrated soldier. But this did not help her in any way, since our hero had already merged with his gun. The snake was perplexed, but then it took a closer look at the guy's weapon. Looking at the barrel of the rifle, the monster became very frightened. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned around and crawled back into the forest. The main character calmly exhaled. He didn't understand where there were such big and scary monsters in this dream. After examining the store, the soldier realizes that he will soon run out of ammunition. And so, he packs a backpack and everything he needs to get out of here and move to a safer place. Having collected all his things, the soldier begins to try to leave this cave again. When our hero climbed up again, he was surprised for the second time by the beauty of this terrible world. Looking at the landscape in more detail, the soldier notices a tree in the distance that was very similar to a baobab. Mistaking this tree for a baobab, our hero decides to use it as a landmark, and if possible, then climb it and inspect the entire area. The feeling of anxiety and someone's presence stressed the main character, and so he tried to go through this forest as quickly as possible. Arriving at the tree, the soldier realizes that it was not a baobab tree. This was the first time he had seen this incredibly tall and wide tree. A few hours later, the guy was still able to climb its crown. Sitting on one of the branches, our hero takes out binoculars to examine the area. Through binoculars, Kong Chan sees flying pieces of earth. It seemed incredible to him. Having examined the entire valley, the guy raises his head and looks into the heavens. He was still very much surprised by the two suns he saw at the beginning, and when he thought a little, he realized that this place was not on Earth at all. Putting the binoculars to his eyes again, the soldier continued to observe his surroundings. At one point, the guy saw some very tall and sharp building. He realized that this structure was definitely built by people, because no matter how you look at it, it looked artificial. And so, the soldier decided to go there. Kong Chan calculated the approximate distance, and he also calculated what would reach the structure after 2 weeks. If he walked 5 kilometers a day, then his supplies should have been enough for this time. But there was one problem, and that was water. Having once again examined the area, our hero finds a small stream in which, apparently, clean water flowed. The soldier looked at that building again. He wondered if going there was a good idea and if there were people there. And so, Kong Chan decides to take a good look around before the sun sets. A few minutes later, the guy slowly but surely climbs down from the huge tree. As soon as the soldier stepped on the ground, he immediately took out his machine gun and began to walk and closely observe everything around him. This whole situation awakened in him memories of one operation. So, the main character walked for several more hours. Every time Kong Chan heard a strange sound, he would turn around and look for its source. Our hero climbed between the thick bushes. He walked between the thin cracks of the rocks. And in the end, the guy came to a small closed shelter, where in front of him he saw a tree on which to rest. To protect himself, the soldier, just in case, collected a lot of dry sticks that he found in the bushes. Our hero quickly scattered them around the tree so that the sticks would become a small and simple trap for him. Once the trap was set, Kong Chan quickly climbed the tree, and having laid down comfortably, the soldier begins to look at the incredibly beautiful sky before going to bed. And when Kong Chan calmed down and decided to rest, his calmness is suddenly interrupted by something flying above him. Looking closely, the soldier sees a giant and long airship flying above him. When Kong Chan realized this, he immediately grabbed his backpack. And he immediately took out his binoculars to take a closer look at the flying object. Looking closely, the main character sees that there were several people on board the airship. The guy couldn't believe what he just saw. And in order to take a closer look at people, the main character takes out a sniper rifle, because there the lens is much more powerful than in binoculars. And in the sight of a sniper rifle, the main character clearly saw the faces of those mysterious and unusual people. The airship gradually increased the distance, and therefore, after a few minutes, Kong Chan could no longer see what was happening on board. Our hero stood for several minutes with his mouth open. He could not believe that he was seeing real people. The next morning, Kong Chan continued his journey. The guy still carefully made his way through the dense jungle. He walked the whole way in thought. Kong Chan couldn't get yesterday's situation and who he saw on board out of his head. After several hours of walking, our hero finally gets to a small river. Looking at her, the guy also observed the incredible beauty of the landscape. Approaching the water, the soldier decides to evaluate it. It looked clean, but the guy didn't know if it was safe to drink. And sitting down near the river, Kong Chan understands that even if you can't drink it, there was simply no other way to survive. And therefore, despite all the fears and worries, the main character takes water in his hands and begins to drink it. But surprise, this water tasted good and was not dirty at all. But even despite this, Kong Chan still decides to be more careful. The guy bends down again and begins to wash himself. At that moment, he felt alive. As soon as our hero stopped all procedures, he suddenly saw something. And at that moment, the eyes of the main character and the eyes of the monster that was hiding under the water simultaneously met. Kong Chan, in a panic, takes out a machine gun and starts shooting straight at the monster. But he dodged all the bullets. And a second later, on top of all this, several more pairs of eyes came out of the water. They all also started to stare at Kong Chan. Our hero still continued to look back. He did not understand where he got the feeling of danger. The guy didn't understand, or those eyes were now watching him. In order to somehow get rid of unnecessary thoughts, the soldier decides to go up the river, but those strange eyes continue to follow him. Suddenly, Kong Chan hears strange sounds coming from the bushes. He reflexively lies down on the ground to protect himself. Suddenly, our hero saw those strange eyes also hide in the water. And a few seconds later, a wild and huge boar ran out of the bushes. Kong Chan, with surprise on his face, watched as the boar gradually approached the river to drink water. And as soon as the boar began to drink water, one of the eyes showed itself again. And then, he began to gradually reduce the distance between himself and the boar. As soon as the animal saw this, it immediately stopped drinking and got scared. The boar, like a small puppy, began to run away from the eye in horror. A second later, the eye emerged from the water and began to follow the boar on land. After a few seconds, the eye still grabbed the poor boar's leg. And he, with horror, tried to somehow get out of the grip, but absolutely nothing worked for him. At the same moment, the others connected to the other eye, and they were clearly stronger than the boar. After a few seconds, the wild beast was attracted by those strange eyes. Our hero remained sitting in place with his mouth open, because he understood that it could have been him in the place of this boar. But he did not remain motionless for long, because after the monster ate the boar, he immediately remembered our hero. Kong Chan quickly removed the safety from the machine gun, and then, he began to fire a hail of bullets at the monster. Fortunately, the soldier knew how to shoot, and thanks to his skills, he was able to hit one of the monster's eyes. He, from unbearable pain, began to scream and squeal, while showing his appearance. The remaining eyes also continued to look directly at our hero, and he, pointing the gun, tried once again to feed the monster's eyes with more cartridges. As soon as the monster hid, the guy stopped firing. Then, he looked away and thought that this world was incredibly dangerous and cruel. After that, Kong Chan continued his journey. Today was already the 6th day since our hero has been trying to reach that building. Kong Chan was infuriated that this journey took him so long. Towards evening, the main character managed to climb a tall tree, and when he got up, he saw a small clearing near this tree, and therefore, the guy decided to rest a little. Our hero still can't forget how long it took him to get here. Partly, it was because the monsters took up too much of his time. After all, in addition to past monsters, the guy fought with other, and more terrible monsters. After these terrible memories, the main character sighs heavily. And then, picking up binoculars, Kong Chan decides to look at his goal, which he has been striving for almost a week. Taking a closer look, the guy notices that this tower very much resembled a sword blade. Kong Chan became convinced for the 3rd time that he was definitely not on Earth. After that, the soldier took out one of his dry rations, and he poured some of the contents into his hand. There was some popcorn and 3 small candies on the palm. After dinner, the soldier decided to rest a little, because in these few days he had experienced a lot. The guy lay there and still couldn't forget about those strange people on the airship. Having put all the puzzles together, Kong Chan realizes that those people are also not from Earth, and therefore, our hero could not casually contact them. The next day, Kong Chan continued his journey, and after some time, he comes to a very similar field, near which he spent the night. Our hero looked at this area with suspicion, because it looked very much like some kind of trap, and if monsters appeared here, the guy would be finished. Despite the fear and uncertainty, the soldier still decides to go to that field. After all, he had no choice but to go there. The wind shook the tall and thick grass. The soldier, meanwhile, had already walked half of this field without getting into trouble. Suddenly, something moved in the grass, and when the guy saw it, he reflexively took out his machine gun and immediately took it off the safety. At the same moment, he heard strange sounds and rustlings behind him. And a few seconds later, all these frightening sounds completely surrounded Kong Chan. Suddenly, one of the sources of this sound began to sharply and quickly approach the shocked soldier. The guy, out of panic, began to try to destroy this creature with a machine gun, but nothing works out for him, because he sees that 2 monsters were still approaching him. And as soon as the soldier decided to change the store, one of the monsters immediately jumped out of the thick grass, and opening its incredibly large mouth, it tried to destroy our hero. Fortunately, the guy didn't panic. He instantly pulled out a pistol, which he always had hanging at the ready, and with a calm face, he began to fire bullets from it directly at the terrible monster. Fortunately, our hero managed to destroy it, but as soon as this monster fell to the ground, the others immediately grouped up and simultaneously began to attack the guy. All 3 of them jumped out of the bushes and also tried to destroy the main character, but suddenly, for some reason they all suddenly changed their minds and hid in the thick grass. The main character was perplexed when he saw how the terrible and vile monsters tucked their tails between their legs and began to run away as if they were little puppies. And then, Kong Chan decides to throw a grenade at them to completely destroy them. After a few seconds, the grate explodes, and all destroyed monsters scatter in different directions. But this did not calm the main character. After all, around him, he again saw how those same monsters surrounded him. The guy had used more than half of his ammo, and he knew that if this monster appeared again, he would be finished. Out of hopelessness, the soldier breaks into a cold sweat, and his heart begins to beat several times faster. And then, he notices how the monsters fell on their backs with their mouths open. And a few seconds later, they all ran away again, just like last time. The guy was at a loss, he didn't understand what was happening here. And then, horror and incredible fear, which he had never felt in his life, filled his face. After all, in front of him stood an incredibly tall stone golem. Compared to the golem, the main character looked more like a small goosebump than a tall man. The soldier stood with his mouth open and did not understand what to do. Suddenly, the monster began to take its first steps. Seeing this, Kong Chan became incredibly scared and began to look for a way out of this situation. Without thinking twice, the soldier decides to plant the mine that he carried with him all the time. And as soon as all preparations were completed, the guy immediately began to run away from this place. But suddenly, Kong Chan saw a giant stone leg in front of him, which gradually descended towards his head. And after a few seconds, the main character activates an explosive device, which at the same second is blown up at the installation site. The golem was perplexed when he looked at his cracked leg. And then, he looked down, and looking closer, he saw a small man who was the culprit of his cracked leg. From this, the golem began to get very angry, and his eyes began to turn red. The main character notices this. Despite his fear, he picks up a grenade and, pulling out the pin, the guy throws it at the golem. After a few seconds, the grenade explodes, covering the giant monster in a bright tongue of flame. From this explosion, the monster lost its left leg, and due to poor balance, the golem began to gradually fall down. The soldier watched all this. He saw how a giant stone statue fell right on top of him. And so the guy decides to run away. Kong Chan ran between hundreds of different pieces of debris, while somehow dodging them. And after some time, our hero safely reaches the nearest forest, where he hides from the monster. Suddenly, a bright yellow seal appears near the golem's head. A boy with silver hair and a rabbit mask on his face got out of it. He was incredibly surprised when he saw the destroyed golem lying on an empty field. Having examined the whole picture, the guy sharply turns his head towards the forest, towards which the main character has already run. Without thinking twice, the boy, with a snap of his finger, takes out some kind of note. And then he burns it and disappears from sight. After some time, night fell in this incredibly beautiful and dangerous world. At this time, the soldier gradually made his way through the terrible bushes, while looking into the thermal imager in the sight of his machine gun. As it turned out, Kong Chan had been walking like this for the third day, and during all this time he had never rested. He was incredibly pleased that the closer he got to the tower, the fewer monsters he came across. After some time, his thermal imager marks some small object that was standing on a tree branch. Noticing him, the soldier immediately takes a position and crouches for a comfortable position. Next, he saw how this little man jumped from a branch and headed somewhere. And at one moment, these little men doubled in number. And then, one of them slipped past the barrel of the machine gun that the soldier was holding. The guy began to nervously drive in different directions to try to hit the unknown. But at one moment, the little man jumped back onto the branch, and in a second turned into a normal-sized woman. Kong Chan was incredibly surprised when he saw this. Suddenly, a girl, in a language unknown to the soldier, asked him who he was. The guy did not react to this in any way. He only again pointed the muzzle of his machine gun directly at the unknown girl. But after a second, he sharply lowered his weapon and said that he did not want to fight. The woman looked at Kong Chan strangely, and then, she suddenly disappeared somewhere. As it turned out, the woman teleported right behind the soldier, and taking advantage of the moment, she put her sharp sword to the back of his head. But our hero was also not bad. He quickly reacted to this, and at the same time, he put a gun to the girl's stomach. The woman cut the soldier slightly, and was convinced that this was his true appearance. At this moment, Kong Chan was thinking about whether he did the right thing by opening up and not defending himself. Suddenly, the woman removed the sword from the back of the guy's head, and now he seems to have calmed down. But, unexpectedly, she began to smile strangely. And then, she abruptly began to jump from side to side, and still speaking in an incomprehensible language, she called the soldier an incapable warrior and asked him how he ended up here. At one point, the woman stopped jumping and seriously thought about destroying the main character. Suddenly, the same seal that was near the head of the destroyed golem appears near her head. The same boy got out of it and shouted to warn his friend that Kong Chan was very dangerous. The girl turned around and asked her friend if he was right. The guy couldn't calm down. He said that the soldier easily defeated the forest guard. For some reason, this made the girl even angrier at our hero. She turned and looked at the guy with a dissatisfied face. At that same moment, Kong Chan sensed something was wrong, and so, just in case, he took out his gun and pointed it at the woman. The girl decided to try to fight the soldier. She thought that Kong Chan was hiding his identity and was not who he really was. The girl's friend shouted to her to stop, but she did not want to listen to him and rushed into battle. The soldier realized that this situation was very dangerous for him, and so, he still shot the woman with a pistol. The girl was incredibly surprised by what she saw. And when the bullet almost reached her head, at the last moment, she put up a protective barrier, which saved her life. The bullet hit the shield directly and bent like plasticine. As a result, the shield was completely destroyed, but the girl, fortunately, remained unharmed. After this situation, the woman looked into the eyes of the main character with a surprised look. The soldier did the same thing. He absolutely did not understand what was happening here. This made the girl even more angry, and she began to activate her abilities. The soldier was frightened by such a surprise. He did not understand what was about to happen and what he should expect. And then, blue sparks began to fly towards the main character, which, fortunately, did not cause much damage to Kong Chan. This is all. From the outside, seen by a boy named Lu, he understood that something bad was about to happen and therefore, he decides to protect himself. The boy quickly opened the shield and placed it in front of him. And then, with the help of his magic, he covered our hero and the girl with the dome. At this moment, the girl could no longer be stopped. She was incredibly angry and determined to defeat the main character. The guy tried to somehow come to an agreement with the girl and ask her not to attack him. But she didn't care. She continued to absorb energy into herself in order to later direct it into the soldier. The guy tried to reach her again, but the girl continued to ignore him. And so, the soldier took out his pistol and pointed it at the girl. At this moment, the girl finished all preparations, and with rage in her eyes, began to attack the main character. The soldier understood absolutely nothing. He stood in bewilderment and looked at how the woman attacked him. And when there were a few seconds left before the collision, suddenly, the wall of the dome was broken through by someone, and a small explosion occurred inside it. A boy named Lu was thrown somewhere to the side by the explosive force that occurred inside the dome. And after flying several meters on solid ground, the guy stops and watches as a small but thick smoke formed at the site of the explosion. When the smoke cleared, Lu saw the girl standing bowing in front of someone. Gradually, the guy began to notice someone's legs. And then, he fully saw the same man whom the main character saw. Kong Chan, in a panic, took out his gun and pointed it at the unknown man. But, due to stress and fatigue, the soldier loses consciousness and falls to the ground. After some time, Kong Chan is tied up, and all his weapons are put in a separate pile. As it turned out, the guy was a prince, and he asked the girl whether everything was okay with her. The girl said with relief that she had not used her powers for a long time, but despite this, everything was fine with her. The prince looked at her strangely, and then he said that she was too hasty. The girl heard this and asked the prince for forgiveness. Suddenly, Lu joined the conversation. From his words, we learn that the girl's name is Kashiria. Lu said that she was not to blame, and in this situation, he was the culprit. But the prince ignored this and began to speak his thoughts out loud. Then, he was distracted by a soldier lying and tied up on the ground. Lu suggested that Kong Chan was a foreigner. Taking the gun in his hands, the guy said that his appearance and language indicated that the main character was a stranger. And also, this gave away his unknown weapon, which was incredibly powerful. The prince heard this and asked Lu how powerful it was. Kashiria, irritably, said that she managed to put up a barrier in a hurry, but it shattered from the incredible power of a steel bullet. The prince thought for a while, and then asked his friends or the soldier if there were any other weapons. Lu looked at the machine strangely and said that this was the first time he had seen all this. Suddenly, Lu got very excited. He suggested that the guys destroy our hero while he was unconscious. But the prince abruptly stopped him and said that he was a warrior and he had honor. And then Kashiria entered the dialogue. She said that she wanted to fight the guy when he woke up. Suddenly, she heard Kong Chan muttering something under his breath. The guy promised his family, as well as his girlfriend, that he would soon try to return home. The prince examined the soldier in detail. He even thought that he was an envoy of one of the bishops. Lu immediately offered to interrogate Kong Chan as soon as he woke up. The prince thought for a while, and then, Lu suggested that we try to talk to our hero using his magic. Lu agreed and said that he would be able to communicate on a certain level. At the same moment, the soldier sharply opens his eyes and comes to his senses. He couldn't understand at all where he was and why he was tied up. Suddenly, in his head he heard a voice that told him to give up. Our hero somehow turned his head towards the source of the sound. And then, in front of him, he saw three people unknown to him, who were clearly not in a friendly mood. And therefore, the soldier immediately asked the unknown people who they were. The prince, with the help of an interpreter, asked the main character where he came from. All three looked at the soldier suspiciously and waited for his answer. The guy was thinking about who was in front of him and what he should do. Kong Chan decides to calm down and tell his captors everything. The soldier told where he was from, and who he was before he got into this amazing and creepy world. Lu couldn't understand the meaning of Kong Chan's name at all. And then, the main character decided to ask a question. He asked those what kind of place this was and who they were. Lu translated everything verbatim to the prince. And the guy said that our hero was on the continent of Lanos. And he himself was the prince of a great empire. The main character gradually began to confirm his guesses that he really was not on Earth. Lu, having heard Kong Chan's guesses, was also convinced that he was a foreigner. And then, the boy asked the soldier what continent he came from. Lu assumed that the guy came to them from the Kona continent. Our hero heard about all these continents for the first time. He had no idea what the trio were talking about. Lu told his comrades that the soldier had simply fallen behind his companions, and therefore they did not need to be so careful with him. Our hero could not understand a word of what the boy was talking about. The soldier again panicked, and he asked the unknown people what they wanted to do with him. Lu looked at the prince and said that he did not see any evil intentions on the part of the soldier. It also seemed to the boy that in the last battle, the main character gave in to the girl. Kashiria heard all this, and with rage in her eyes, she asked Lu whether he wanted to say goodbye to life. The boy flew several meters away from the girl and said that it was just an objective assessment of abilities. Suddenly, Kashiria took out her swords and took a stance. The prince also looked somewhere suspiciously, as if they both sensed some kind of danger. Lu was perplexed by what his comrades were doing. And then, the whistle of an arrow flying at them was heard, which miraculously did not hit the boy. Following her, several more arrows flew. Kashiria reacted instantly and began to repulse the attack of the unknown enemy. The prince also did not stand still, he skillfully dodged every fired arrow. As soon as the enemy's attack ceased, the prince took out his own arrows and began to attack the enemy in response. These arrows hit the bushes, and then the screams of wounded opponents were heard from the bushes. A few seconds after the hit, monsters wearing robes began to emerge from the bushes. In this world, they were called Templars. As soon as one of them showed himself, the rest of the Templars crawled out of the bushes and began to expect something. As it turned out, several monsters were hiding in the trees. And as soon as the trio were distracted by the lower ones, they instantly jumped out of their hiding places and began to attack the guys. Kashiria immediately reacted to them and began to destroy them one by one. The prince also did not stand by, he took out his golden spears and began to help the girl in this battle. Lu, meanwhile, began to read a special spell, but when he had to say the final word, the monster immediately knocked him down and prevented the boy from doing so. Kashiria came to the boy's aid, she instantly destroyed the monster. And then, she ordered her comrades to immediately retreat and run away. Lu panicked, he didn't know what to do. Suddenly, Kong Chan called him. The soldier asked the boy to quickly untie him. Lu looked at our hero when he shouted to him that if he did not untie him, then everyone here would be destroyed by monsters. The boy turned his head sharply, hoping that one of his friends would tell him how to deal with this situation. But unfortunately for Lu, Kashiria was currently fighting several monsters, and the prince also could not help him in any way. The guy completely forgot about untying the soldier. He was only thinking about how he could save his friends. Lu incredibly wanted at least one archer to appear on their team at this moment. And then the whole team will be saved. Suddenly, Lu remembers our hero, and then he sharply turns his gaze to the machine gun lying next to him. At this moment, the main character was diligently dodging the monster's quick blows. And then, he again asked the boy to free him from his shackles. Lu was incredibly worried, he thought about it for a long time. And since he did not see any hostility in Kong Chan, Lu still decides to free him. Without thinking twice, the boy takes out a magic note. And then he begins to cast a spell. At this moment, 3 huge monsters attack him. The monsters also did not leave the defenseless soldier aside. And as soon as one of the monsters almost struck the main character, Lu immediately finishes his spell and then, all the magic ropes disappear and the main character becomes free again. The soldier was incredibly angry at the monsters, and therefore, he gave one of them a good kick right in the face. With this blow, the guy removed the hood from the monster's head, and now one could see his terrible and ugly face. The soldier was incredibly surprised by this. He immediately asked the boy who they were. Lu, being somewhere on the side out of fear, said that these monsters were the dogs of the high priest. The soldier wanted to know more about all this, but Lu, hiding in the bushes, said that he would find out about them a little later. Suddenly, the guy turns around and sees how the monster is about to hit him. Kong Chan quickly reacts to this and dodges this quick blow at the last moment. Then, he runs to the machine and instantly picks it up. After the machine gun is in the soldier's hands, the guy takes a position and takes good aim. And then, he quickly fires several bullets at this monster. Kashiria was incredibly surprised when she heard the shots. The prince was also shocked by this. They both turned around and saw how Kong Chan dealt with the monsters. Kong Chan, without thinking twice, reloaded his machine gun, and then, he opened fire again on the monsters. Almost all the bullets fired hit the opponents, and all of them left this world at that very second. The prince also did not stop fighting, he destroyed the monsters over and over again. Suddenly, while Kong Chan was trying to destroy one of the monsters, another one sneaked up on him unnoticed. And swinging his sickle, he tried to strike the soldier. Our hero realized too late that there was no way for him to escape from this attack. Fortunately, he is saved in time by Kashiria, who at the same moment ended the battle with her opponents. The next minute, the guys fought side by side with the monsters, while covering each other. Finally, Lu climbs out of the bushes, and then asks his friends to give him a few more minutes. Unexpectedly, Kashiria asks our hero to leave all the monsters to her. But the girl did not calculate their number, and our hero warned her in time that someone was attacking her from behind. Kashiria turned around, but she still didn't have enough time to destroy the monster. And fortunately, the girl was saved, because when she turned around, she saw how the monster had already been destroyed. When Kashiria looked back, she saw how Kong Chan saved her. The guy nodded his head and told them to continue fighting. A few minutes had passed since Lu asked his friends for some time. And now, the boy was ready to cast the spell, and the moment Lu started speaking, somewhere to the side an incredibly loud and terrible roar sounded. Horror appeared on Kashuria's face, she could not believe what she had just heard. The prince, still fighting the monster, asked Lu when he would cast the spell. And at that same moment, almost everything was ready, the boy was just pronouncing the last words of the spell. When our hero heard this roar, he immediately asked the girl what that sound was. Kashiria, with incredible emotion inside, said that it was Bloody Mason. Kong Chan did not understand a little what the girl said, he asked her to tell her in more detail about this creature. But without waiting for an answer, our hero notices how all the monsters suddenly began to disperse to the sides, while making a small corridor. As soon as the corridor was built, terrible sounds began to be heard approaching from the darkness of the dense forest. All the monsters stood motionless, waiting for whoever was about to appear in front of them. Kong Chan and Kashiria were a little panicked, they also didn't understand what to expect. The prince was also at a loss about what was happening around him. A few seconds later, a red and huge red leg appears from the darkness of the forest, which easily knocks down a nearby tree. And after the leg, an incredibly large and scary monster appears with an iron mask on its face and a sharp axe in its hands. The monster opened his already narrow eye and began to closely examine those around him. And when he noticed the prince, he immediately began to rage and try to destroy it. But just as the monster wanted to strike, someone shot at him and hit him right in the arm. Bloody Mason stopped and then carefully looked at the culprit. The monster saw the main character standing in front of him, who at that moment was holding his machine gun at the ready. Kashiria at that very moment realized that something was about to happen, and therefore, she ordered her friends to immediately dodge and run in different directions. As it turned out, the girl was right, because at that moment, Bloody Mason began to run straight towards them, with his axe raised up. The monster did not distinguish where his opponents were and where his allies were, and therefore, he began to unify everyone on his way. At the same moment, Lu's spell was ready, the boy was holding a huge magic ball in his small hands. At the same time, Kong Chan remembers that he has a sniper rifle, and so, he asks Kashiria to cover him while he tries to lift her. After the warning, the main character immediately ran straight to the weapon. And at that moment, Bloody Mason saw the soldier and tried to destroy him. Kashiria did not allow this to happen, she protected the main character from misfortune in time. Also, the prince helped our hero. He happily destroyed several monsters to make it easier for the soldier to get to the weapon. Thanks to the teamwork of his new friends, Kong Chan takes the weapon with ease. But this was not enough, because Kashiria still could not cope with Bloody Mason, and therefore, at the last moment she warned our hero. Fortunately, the soldier was well trained, and therefore, he easily dodged this quick and sudden attack. The monster was furious that he could not destroy the guy with one throw. But there was no difference anymore, because Lu entered the battle. The boy enlarged this sphere several times, and then said the last spell. After all this, he hit all the monsters on Earth with his magic. Bloody Mason and all the monsters on the ground were blinded by a bright yellow flash. From the outside, it looked as if a meteorite was about to fall to the ground. But when the attack happened, absolutely nothing changed, and all the monsters, as well as people, remained in their places. When the main character opened his eyes, he looked around. The guy didn't understand what just happened, and why all the monsters were safe and sound. Bloody Mason looked at the flying boy and immediately realized that he was the culprit of this blinding attack. And then, the monster began to run straight towards the main character. At this moment, Kong Chan asked his new friends to dodge. Suddenly, small craters began to form on the ground. And then, the earth turned into plasticine and began to fly up. The soldier was seriously frightened. He squatted down and covered his head with his hands. But when nothing happened to him, the guy calmed down and continued to look at what was happening. After a few seconds, Kong Chan stopped being afraid. Now he was incredibly surprised by what was happening before his eyes. The guy saw how the bodies of vile and terrible monsters began to crumble into pieces and pieces. The soldier instantly looked at the boy and guessed that he was the culprit of this whole situation. Our hero also saw how he and two comrades were under an invisible dome, and therefore this attack was not terrible for them. At the same moment, the body of the Bloody Mason practically dissolved. And after a few seconds, there was practically nothing left of the monster. Once all the monsters disappeared, only 4 friends remained on the battlefield. Suddenly, Lu's strength began to drain. And at that same second, the boy began to fall at incredible speed straight to the ground. Kashiria saw this. The girl immediately reacted and caught her friend in time. Some time later, the team went to look for shelter. After several hours of travel, they finally stopped on one of the paths. The prince and the girl looked at each other, and Kashiria quietly pointed to the guy in the direction of the bushes. She guessed that monsters were everywhere, and that she was surrounded by them. The prince did not know what to do. He realized that they were completely under siege. The main character decides to join the conversation. Kong Chan asks his friends whether there were many enemies around them. The prince remained silent, and Kashiria said that there were about 2,000 monsters, and besides, it was unknown how many Bloody Masons were among them. The soldier was shocked when he heard that there were so many monsters. The prince said that they somehow need to survive this night. The soldier absolutely did not understand what the guys were talking about. He asked them whether reinforcements would soon come to the monsters. Kashiria said that his guesses were wrong, and the prince did not mean it. The girl explained that monsters receive vitality from the energy of the moon, and especially during the full moon. Kong Chan thought this was a bit unfair and terrible, but the woman said that they were all sectarians. She said that the monsters glorified their god in whom they believed. They also accepted people and turned them into their slaves. From this conversation, the guy realized that when daylight comes, it will be difficult for the enemies to receive the energy of the moon, and they will no longer be able to use their incredible power. But this guess was not 100% true. Kashiria said that not everything is so simple, because these monsters were strong even during the day. Also, the girl said that they could deal with the monsters now, until they received additional power from the moon. And then, she invited the prince to try to break through. The prince said that they could not do this, because Lu was in terrible condition. And then the man asked the girl how far away was the cave where they stopped yesterday. Kashiria quickly calculated everything and said that even at full speed, the journey to that gap would take about half a day. The prince began to think. He understood that they needed to move as carefully as possible. Suddenly, Kong Chan suggested that the guys dig in here. Kashiria looked at the guy strangely. And then, she irritably asked the soldier if he just wanted to give up. But our hero meant to create his own shelter, and not to look for it. The girl asked whether the soldier suggested they dig a hole and stay here. Kong Chan confirmed her words and said that if possible, they also need to set some traps. This was the first time the woman had heard about traps and their installations. And then, the main character asked if the guys knew anything about the secret shelter. After some time, the main character and his friends began to make traps for monsters. The main character told his comrades what and where they need to install in order to catch the monsters. He also monitored the entire process to ensure that his friends did everything well and without haste. He himself also laid each trap and tested its ability. After some traps were ready, Kashiria asked if they would definitely work. Our hero said that their opponents will probably also have some traps. When Kong Chan was about to make another trap, he told the guys that the most annoying thing on the battlefield is being wounded. If one of the companions is wounded, then it will be quite difficult to attack, because a comrade cannot be left in trouble. But since these are monsters, one couldn't expect anything like that from them. First of all, a small wound will be enough to neutralize enemies. The soldier also said that a skilled sniper always aims for the lower body. The girl, hearing the word sniper, tensed up a little. Our hero then explained that it is difficult for a person or anything else to move freely even if one toe is hurt. When the soldier laid another trap, the girl heard a strange noise coming from the side. When she turned around, she saw Lu finally regain consciousness and wake up. After some time, the boy could freely cast magic. And the first thing he did was cover all the traps with earth. After this spell, the guy ran out of strength again and almost fell to the ground, but the prince caught him in time. Several more hours passed, our hero still could not calm down with the installation of various traps. More and more new ideas came into his head, and he gradually brought them to life. After all the traps were set, the soldier could finally breathe out with peace of mind. The prince asked the main character whether 16 traps would be enough. Kong Chan said that this would be enough for a start. And then, Kashiria thought, what if the monsters don't get caught in them? To this, the soldier said that the monsters must definitely fall for them. After some time, the enemies showed up, and they pursued Kashiria. The girl skillfully distracted them and drove them straight to the traps. As soon as she found herself on a field with traps, the girl immediately stopped and decided to wait until the monsters themselves fell into them. As expected, the first monster immediately fell into one of the traps. He was in incredible pain when his leg was pierced by sharp tree branches. And then, several more monsters fell into the traps, and they also screamed from unbearable pain in their legs. The girl took advantage of this chance, and thanks to her abilities, she was easily able to destroy several injured monsters. The rest of the monsters looked at all this with horror. They understood that if they went forward, they would also fall into traps. Kashiria stood surrounded by monsters, and smiled because they were afraid to approach her. As soon as one of the monsters fell into the trap again, the girl quickly reacted and destroyed absolutely everyone in this clearing. Someone even tried to escape while his comrades were being destroyed by Kashiria. But he also fell into one of the cunning and invisible traps of the protagonist. As soon as the monster caught the tight rope, it broke and the stretched branch immediately hit him right in the stomach. Meanwhile, the girl dealt with absolutely all the monsters that had pursued her earlier. And now she was left standing alone among the destroyed bodies of terrible and vile creatures. At the same time, the prince was also leading a huge crowd of monsters. A few minutes later, he ran up to the soldier's prepared trap. As soon as the man jumped over the large pit, the monsters immediately began to leave this world one after another. When some monsters had already activated all the traps, the survivors looked up in surprise. They saw Lu flying in the sky, and at that time he was holding an incredibly large fireball above his small head. As soon as the boy read his spell, he immediately threw this ball straight into the crowd of monsters. A few minutes later, Kashiria came running to the guys. Upon arrival, she was also able to destroy several monsters. When everyone was gathered, suddenly, the prince and the girl noticed some strange sounds coming from the side. When they turned their heads, they saw Bloody Mason coming out of the bushes. The monster started screaming when he fell into one of Kong Chan's traps. But his screams were short-lived, since the bullet flies quickly, and therefore, the monster was incredibly quickly destroyed by the main character. And he destroyed it with the help of his sniper rifle. And as soon as the soldier waited for the right moment, he immediately gave a signal to his comrades. And then, from the bushes, he began to destroy every monster that caught his eye. So, the friends fought side by side for several more hours against creepy and terrible monsters. After some time, a whole war took place in this clearing. Lu used his incredible magic to attack his opponents who were attacking him. The main character shot at the monsters with a sniper rifle, covering his comrades. After several hours, all enemies in the area were finally cleared. The prince looked around and asked his friends whether no one dared to escape. The girl, shaking blood from her ball, said that all these monsters were possessed, and therefore none of them could leave the battlefield. Our hero crawled out of his hiding place and looking at the whole picture, he said that the monsters were merciless. Kashiria said that individually these monsters were weak, but when they united, they became truly creepy and invincible. The prince asked Kong Chan what they should do now. The main character thought for a while, and then he said that they must follow the established escape route and continue to set traps as they move forward. Suddenly, Kashiria asked the guy if it would work. The girl thought that the monsters could predict their route and bypass them, and then wait. The soldier thought for a moment, and then said that this is why when retreating they need an advanced detachment. In the current case they could not let anyone forward. Suddenly, a boy joined the conversation and said that the boys had nothing to worry about here. Kashiria, with fire in her eyes, asked her friend if they could use detection or tracking magic. Lu said that it was quite easy and reliable, but unfortunately, this magic wasted too much energy. But then, the boy offers his friends an alternative option. He takes out a paper with a spell from his cloak, and then with a very simple spell he charms her. As soon as the first ritual was completed, Lu made several dozen more from one piece of paper. And then, like little birds, they flew into the sky and began to soar like stars. The friends looked at this phenomenon in surprise. They had never before seen how simple paper could fly and shine at the same time. The soldier also saw this for the first time, his surprise knew no bounds. Even this simple spell could take a lot of strength from the boy, and he, holding his head, asked the guys to rest a little. The prince supported Lu and said that he and the rest of the guys did a great job. Then the man invited his friends to have a snack and moisten their throats. A few minutes later, the team settled down near the roots of a large and tall tree. The girl looked at the map and said that if they continued like this, they would be able to get out of the forest before sunrise. The prince said that it was all thanks to the main character and his incredibly powerful weapon. The soldier was embarrassed by such words. He said that he would not have been able to cope with the help of new friends. The girl, closing the card and folding it into her pocket, said that this time it was the merit of our hero. At one point, Kashiria didn't really like the way the soldier was looking at her. With anger on her face, she asked the guy why he was looking at her like that. Kong Chan laughed and said that everything was fine. Then the prince entered the conversation. He was very interested in the weapons that the soldier used during each of his battles. The girl said that its strength and range cannot be compared with a bow, and its rate of fire is similar to shooting from a crossbow. The soldier said that the weapon was originally designed to destroy various targets. Then the guy told absolutely everything about his weapon. The prince heard this and said that they would continue to need his help, because without this weapon they were as if without arms and legs. Kong Chan, looking at one point, said that he wanted to continue helping his new comrades. Kashiria didn't like the soldier's tone a little. She asked him to stay with them, because it was better for him. Our hero asked the girl to calm down, then he himself said that he had run out of ammunition, and that's why he was worried about it. Kashiria was surprised when she heard the word cartridges. The guy took out one cartridge and said that they were also called ammunition. Next, the soldier began to explain how the cartridge works in the machine gun. The girl heard this whole story and realized that this was a real problem. Suddenly, the prince asked the boy whether he had any way to somehow help the soldier. Lu went down to the guy and sat down opposite him. And then the boy asked the soldier to hold the cartridge in his hands and examine it. The main character gave him a whole sniper rifle, and Lu began to examine her in detail. After some time, he gave the rifle back, and then said that he understood the approximate operating principle of this device. The girl immediately exclaimed. She thought that they had some way to make cartridges. To this, the boy just shook his head. He said that in his mentor's laboratory he saw ancient documents where he described something similar. Kashiria asked the boy whether it was possible to make them, and whether he remembered at least anything from those documents. Lu said he didn't remember anything. However, the necessary ingredients for this were not of the magical age, and this was the main problem. Additionally, the black powder used for ammunition was also a problem. It can only be obtained by going to the magic tower in the imperial capital. The guys, having heard their friend's statements, immediately began to think about what to do. Suddenly, an idea comes to our hero. He remembers that the boy had previously shot fireballs. And then, the soldier asked the guy what the basic principle of its operation was. Kong Chan was sure that the boy did not just light a fire with his hands and shoot it. And then Lu gets the idea of a soldier. He happily tells him that to create a fireball, he needs to compress the air into flames and then say the right words. As soon as the boy explained this, another very good idea comes to his mind. And this time, the girl asked the guys if there was any way to recreate the ammunition. Lu smiled and said that there was one way to make a cartridge, but he was not sure that this method would work. Kashiria again asked the boy if he had a way to solve the problem with bullets. Lu said that it would take a lot of effort, so he would try to develop a recipe for bullets. There will be problems with the tip, but instead, Lu can do magical processing. At this time, Kong Chan took out a military pendant. Hearing the boy's words, he thought that magical processing was some kind of enchantment. When the soldier took out the pendant, he saw how a gold medallion was attached to it. Earlier, when the Templars attacked the team, our hero wanted to ask who they were. But instead of explanations, he heard some incomprehensible words. Even then he could not understand the language of his friends. To solve this problem, Lu quickly conjured a golden medallion for Kong Chan, which helped him understand their speech. Once the main character received the medallion, the boy said that if a soldier is within 5 steps, he will be able to understand and speak without Lu's help. Kong Chan sat and thought about it. He believed that magic in some sense is better than mechanics, like a telephone. When our hero came to his senses, he heard Lu ask him whether he needed a bullet casing. Lu said that he needed it because he also needed a medium on which to engrave the magic formula. Kashiria realized that the boy needed to engrave each bullet, and so she asked him if there was some simple way. Lu said that it would be nice if he carved the formula onto the bullet, but he couldn't do that with his current abilities. Kashiria was surprised that the process was so difficult. Kong Chan listened to the entire dialogue from the side. He realized that the girl was very confident in Lu's skills, and therefore the soldier did not doubt him either. Suddenly, the boy told the soldier that the performance would be good. After all, he had previously tried to engrave magic spells several times, and this should be enough to remember a couple of spells. After some time, the guys continued to prepare for the next battle. They set and made new traps. As soon as everything was ready, each of the friends took their positions and waited for their opponents. And as soon as the enemies showed up, the comrades began to fight while covering each other. At this time, Lu tried to engrave a spell on the cartridge case. The girl was already tired of endless battles. She asked the prince how many more enemies there were. The guy said that they needed to hold out a little longer, because the sun would rise soon. This infuriated Kashiria incredibly, because these monsters attacked non-stop. In parallel with this, Lu tried to do his own thing. The girl saw that something was not working out for the boy. Lu said that this was the magic of the ancient era. These were very old inscriptions. The boy felt like he was missing something. Our hero watched all this. He realized that if this continued, it would be very difficult for them to survive. Suddenly, the prince approached Kong Chan and asked the soldier how many cartridges he had left. The guy said that most likely he would use up all his ammo in the next battle. The girl realized that they had big problems. But the soldier said that if things got too bad, he would use his automatic rifle. And then Kashiria became interested in what the difference was between a sniper and an automatic rifle. The guy quickly told her absolutely everything he knew about these weapons. At this time, he said that he had a little more time left, and he would succeed. The prince supported the boy and said that he did not need to rush. After all, if this cartridge explodes inside the weapon, then they will have big problems. Our hero really believed that the boy would succeed, because with his abilities, you can do anything. After some time, the enemies attacked our friends again. Kong Chan, sitting in his shelter, covered the guys from a distance. Kashiria destroyed the monsters one by one, not giving them a chance to win. The prince also did not lag behind. He destroyed absolutely all the monsters that tried to attack him. And Lu did not stay away. He needed to rest a little before continuing the enchantment. Suddenly, Kashiria saw that the boy was in danger. She warned Lu, but it was too late. And at this moment, the boy is saved by an incredibly fast and accurate shot from the protagonist, who destroys the monster with one shot. A few hours later, the long-awaited sunrise finally arrives. The prince and Kashiria were incredibly happy when they saw the first and warm rays of sunlight. Our hero and Lu were also pleased with this. A few minutes later, the guys ran to the exit from the forest. They saw how the sun was blinding the exit, and therefore, they ran with all their might to quickly get out. And as soon as the forest was behind them, the friends saw an incredibly beautiful picture, which they really wanted to see earlier. The comrades were pleased with themselves and the work they had done for this incredible moment. But, unfortunately, Kashiria saw something very scary on the horizon, and her face changed in an instant. Indeed, on the horizon, the comrades saw an incredibly large army of monsters that were gradually approaching them. There were so many monsters that it was impossible to count them. Horror and despair appeared on Kashiria's face. Kong-chan broke out in a cold sweat, and Lu could not contain his emotions. The girl was incredibly angry, but even though no one had practically any strength, she still stood up to continue fighting. And unfortunately, the main character has run out of absolutely all his ammo. And therefore, the soldier had no choice but to use an automatic rifle. But it also had few cartridges. Unexpectedly, Lu called the main character. He hesitantly showed him the result of his work. The boy held out a cartridge case, on which a magic spell was engraved. Lu asked the protagonist to handle them carefully because there was a possibility that the cartridges could explode at any moment. Kong-chan, inserting the cartridges into the magazine, said that he understood, and that he would try to do everything in his power. As soon as the magazine was attached, the main character wanted to quickly find out what this ammunition was like in a real battle. Then, the main character examined the area and decided where his hiding place would be. A few seconds later, the soldier points to a very thick and tall tree, and says that he will cover the guys from there. The girl thought that it would be better for the soldier to fight with them. The guy said that it would be better if someone covered them from the side. At this moment, the prince was thinking about what to do, and what they should do. Lu was seized with incredible panic. He was very afraid of this huge and powerful army, which was confidently heading straight towards them. Suddenly, the soldier notices something in the crowd of this army. Namely, he saw real people there, but for some reason they were all white and nothing. Kong-chan took a closer look at them and asked his friends whether those people were also religious fanatics. Kashiria and the prince could not say a word. And Lu said that these people were called Gua. Our hero again became interested in what kind of people they were, and how they appeared in the first place. But still, he decided that the most important thing now was to try to defeat the incredibly large army of monsters. Our hero ran to his tree so that later he could climb it and help his comrade. Crawling along the thick and hard base of the tree, Kong-chan hoped that they would still survive. A few minutes later, the main character lay in his position and looked through the sniper scope. Suddenly, the guy wonders why these monsters are chasing them, and where his new friends are going. Forgetting about all this, the soldier told his friends that they needed to break through on the right side before the monsters began the siege. Kashiria was a little worried about the guy. She asked him how he was going to get out. Kong-chan said that these are already his problems, and he will sort it out somehow. The prince asked the girl to hurry up and not think about anything. A few seconds later, the three friends began to attack an incredibly huge army of monsters. As stated in their plan, they broke through the right side. And so, despite all the fears and uncertainty, the trio began their battle against the army. The boy used fire magic, and thereby he set the monsters on fire. As soon as the fire went out, the prince saw someone in the crowd of this army. There was incredible shock on the man's face. After all, there he saw one of his subjects. The man did not want to eliminate her or hurt her in any way. But the girl didn't care. No matter what, she attacked her former master. Well, as soon as the distance between them approached, the girl immediately fell to the ground without any signs of life. Suddenly, Kashiria called the prince. She fought with monsters, and said that the guy should not doubt. After all these people were no longer his subordinates, and they were no longer connected with him in any way. Fighting off the powerful attacks of the monsters, the girl assumed that someone had already charmed them with black magic. At the same time, Kong-chan fires his last bullet. He took out the magazine, and with an uncertain look he looks into the clip where the enchanted cartridges lay. Despite all doubts, Kong-chan inserts a magazine into the sniper rifle, and watching the battle, he waited for the moment when he could test this bullet. At the same time, friends fought desperately to protect their lives and the lives of their comrades. At one point, Lu runs out of strength, and because of this, he began to bleed. Kashiria was distracted from the fight and stood up to watch the boy. At the same moment, the prince and Kashiria were surrounded by monsters. The girl has taken command, she will clear the way. And Lu had to take care of the prince, despite his condition. At the same moment, the soldier finally notices the target. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, he and his comrades hear the sound that came from the horn. Turning around, the prince and the girl saw a knight standing on the horizon, and behind him was his army. Taking a closer look at the flag of these knights, Kashiria understood that Count Lemisandro himself came to their aid. The knight took out his incredibly beautiful and long sword. And then he ordered his army to protect the prince from the dirty traitors. Immediately after his command, the troops took out their weapons and, despite everything, rushed into battle. The greatest Count Lemisandro did the same. A few seconds after the command, the knights immediately began to fight the army of evil monsters. The swordsmen mercilessly destroyed every monster that came their way. And the archers eliminated the monsters, covering their comrades. On a small field, a real war broke out between humanity and monsters. The prince and Kashiria were incredibly happy when Count Lemisandro himself came to their aid. Suddenly, the count rode up to the guys on his beautiful white horse. He greeted the prince. The count was glad that everything was fine with the prince and that now he was safe. And then, he turned his head and saw a horse being led for the prince. The man easily jumped onto the beast, and taking in his hands the sword that Lemisandro gave him, he continued to fight the monsters, already sitting on a horse and holding a sharp and long sword in his hands. As soon as the prince saw the monster, he immediately swung. With an incredibly accurate blow of his sword, he tore the monster's head off his shoulders. The rest of the warriors also made their way through the endless squads of monsters. After all, under the command of the prince and the count, this war was supposed to be victorious. At the same time, Lu was destroying monsters using fire magic, and Kashiria destroyed monsters with the help of her incredibly sharp swords. The main character watched all this from afar. He was also pleased that the support group had come to their aid. The soldier also understood that now was not the time to relax and rely only on the knights. The guy quickly returned to his fighting position and again continued to track his enemies. At that moment, in his sight, Kong Chan saw a bloody mason, who wanted to attack someone. The soldier, sensing danger, immediately pulled the trigger. At that moment, the bullet hit the inside of the sniper rifle, and after the explosive force pushed the bullet out of the barrel, the magical seal applied by Lu activated its properties. An unknown electrical force began to be released from the cartridge case. And a few seconds later, this magic bullet fired a magical and incredibly powerful charge. And this bullet hit Bloody Mason directly in the head, who could understand absolutely nothing at that moment. A few moments after the hit, the monster fell to the ground without signs of life, while crushing 3 more comrades with its body. Kong Chan was incredibly pleased with the effect of this magic bullet. After this shot, the soldier immediately reloaded his rifle, and he made several more such shots. At this moment, Count Lemisandro commanded his troops and led them into battle. People had a huge advantage in this battle, because they were more experienced and brave. The monsters gradually became fewer and fewer, thanks to the excellent work of the swordsman. Suddenly, the count saw how one of the Bloody Masons wanted to destroy his soldier. He rushed to the rescue without delay, but it was already too late as Bloody Mason was safely destroyed. Count Lemisandro could not understand by what miracle this monster was destroyed, and at that moment, he saw a bright flash that was on that very tall and thick tree. For a second, the count thought that this someone would be too dangerous for him, but the prince immediately approached the man and said that the count had no need to worry so much. The count looked at the prince in surprise, but he, with a smile on his face, said that it was their very good friend. After this, the knight raised his sword to the skies, and then he ordered the soldiers to behead the enemies and protect the blood of the Holy Empire. Immediately after these words, the warriors' motivation rose, and with even greater fire in their eyes they rushed into battle with the monsters. The prince also did not stand aside, he helped his comrades as best he could. Lu did the same, thanks to his fire magic, he covered his comrades and thereby helped her a lot. Kashiria also, without any doubt, destroyed her enemies and helped her allies who were in trouble. Somewhere in the distance, Kong Chan was covering his comrades with a sniper rifle and magical ammunition. After some time, the war was finally over, and all the troops, along with our hero, returned back to the shelter. After the battle, they tied up the monsters, as well as the people, and carried them with them. The prince felt sorry for these people, because they left this world, but were never able to find peace. The count agreed with him. As it turned out, people should not be given holy water, because they were already possessed by evil spirits. A soldier joined the conversation and asked his comrades whether it was possible to free people from this influence. Kashiria said that the only one who could still save them from the curse was the Archmage. He was the only one who could save these people. Kong Chan asked his friends who the Archmage was. Lu said that it was his mentor, and he could easily do it. But by the time the guys get to the place where the mentor is, all people will leave this world. The boy also said that the transformed monsters had a limit, and that was 10 days. After 10 days, their life force reaches a threshold and they will lose their humanity. Hearing this, our hero asks why drag these people along if they can no longer be cured. The girl looked into the distance and said that they were still people. And also, this was the only thing they could do for the victims. Suddenly, the count and prince saw one of the knights approaching them. As soon as the knight ran closer, he said that the castle was still about 30 kilometers away, and there was also a village nearby, a quarter of a day's journey from here. One of the knights asked the count what to do. At the same time, the main character was thinking about this situation. He knew that knights rode horses, and there was no problem with that. Considering that they have still decided to take the injured people, it will be difficult for them to move. After thinking a little, the count said that it would be better to rest in a village and then continue on his way to the castle. The prince confirmed the count's word and agreed with him. After some time, troops arrive in the village. Absolutely all the residents were shocked and they saw soldiers coming to their village. The knights rode majestically past the people and reached the nearest house where they could wait out the night. A few hours later, the friends stop at a hut where they order themselves a lot of delicious food. The prince praised the count for his excellent work. But he said that all this was thanks to the care of the goddess Ranesh. The prince said that if not for the count, these monsters would have attacked him and soon destroyed him. The man said that he had been following the prince when he heard the news that he was leaving the province. And then the count asked whether the prince managed to do what he planned. Suddenly, the guy turns his head and asks the main character to leave the room for a while. The soldier did not argue with the prince. He silently stood up and left the hut. The guy was wondering what his comrades were talking about that they even asked him to leave. Suddenly, Kashiria approaches Kong Chan. She asked the guy if he was upset because of this incident. Our hero turned around sharply. And then he said that the information was much more valuable than the lives of more than hundreds of soldiers, and therefore he understood the prince's request. The girl looked at the soldier strangely, and then asked who he really was, because she noticed that the guy was an unusual soldier. Our hero did not understand at all what his girlfriend was talking about. Kashiria looked at the guy strangely. And then I remembered all the moments spent with him, and how he helped out his friends in different situations. The girl thought that the main character was a high-ranking knight, because he did not disdain to rummage through the earth and secretly destroy opponents. And then, Kashiria looked at Kanchan strangely, because at that moment she thought that if they encountered a whole squad like our hero, they would feel very bad. The guy exhaled. And then he said that in the country where he lived there were about 50 million people. Kashiria was surprised to hear such an incredibly large number. And then, the soldier began to name how many military personnel they had, and exactly how many were those who were higher or equal in rank to him. The girl was incredibly surprised when she heard that there could be about 50,000 such smart and incredible people as Kong Chan. The guy said that it was only in Korea, but there were also other countries. After Kong Chan named all the countries and their military strength and numbers, the girl broke into a cold sweat out of fear of meeting them. Seeing the fear on Kashiria's face, Kong Chan asked the girl not to worry, because the world in which he lives and this world were not connected in any way, and therefore there will be no war between them in the future. And when Kashiria heard that the soldier did not know how to get back home, she immediately thought about it. And suddenly, she tells the main character that Lu might know the solution to this problem. After realizing this thought, a smile appeared on the girl's face. She rushed to the soldier and said that Lu could have asked his teacher to transfer Kong Chan back. During the shaking, our hero asked the girl whether Mentor Lu was an archmage. Kashiria turned around and said that he was the wisest on the continent and had incredible magical abilities. After this, the girl suggested immediately going to the capital. After all, the boy's mentor was in the capital, and only there could he be found. At the same time, the count and the prince were talking to each other. The prince was incredibly frightened by the count's words. The man said that 2 roads and 7 castles on the way to the capital had been captured. And the other 6 did not get in touch. As the conversation progressed, he guessed what the count wanted to tell him. The man looked at the ground and suggested that the capital had already been captured by their enemies. At the same time, in the capital of the empire, a new mistress sat on the throne, and soulless monsters walked around her. Her advisor approached the girl. She told the lady that the prince had already met with the count. The girl guessed that our friends managed to break through the siege. The advisor also said that the guys had an assistant. The lady wanted to know more about this assistant. The advisor said that it was a wandering warrior. The girl liked the information that the advisor reported to her. And then, the advisor asked the lady what she planned to do. The girl said that she didn't have any thoughts yet. Then, the advisor decided to discuss the prince. She said that the guy became arrogant, being behind the shield of the empire, Count Lemisandro. The lady agreed with the words of her speaker. And then, she suggested ambushing the prince. She wondered if the prince, famous for his incredible caution, would fall for her. The advisor smiled and said that they needed to use bait. A bait that the prince should definitely fall for. As it turned out, all this time the main character and Kashiria were going somewhere. At the same time, the girl made sure that the soldier followed her exactly. But at the moment, Kong-chan was only interested in how he could quickly return home to his family and friends. Suddenly, Kashiria told our hero that the magicians were very difficult to understand, because they were always doing some kind of research and hiding in the corners. And then, she said that Lu was much better than other magicians. This phrase confused our hero. Kashiria turned around and told Kong-chan that mages were a separate race. After all, they were all arrogant, and they were also very greedy for money. It seemed to the soldier that, to some extent, the magicians were like solitary recluses. Namely, those who spend time alone, isolating themselves from the outside world. Hearing the explanation, Kashiria laughed loudly and said that this was very accurately said. After this, Kong-chan asked the girl why the magicians were greedy for money, because the guy thought that they were always conducting different experiments. Kashiria said that the guy had already answered his question. After all, magicians need to get money from somewhere for their experiments and research. Also, the girl said that Lu belonged to the Imperial Majesty Tower and received full support at the national level, so this does not apply to him. After a few seconds, the guys finally arrive at the place they need, namely some kind of tent. As soon as Kashiria approached the tent, she immediately opened the entrance and entered it. The main character followed her. In the middle of the large tent, the guys saw Lu, who was standing over a pink magic ball. It was clear that something was wrong with the boy. Kashiria, not noticing anything suspicious, approached Lu and began to tell him her idea on how to bring Kong-chan back home. When the girl saw that something was wrong with Lu, she immediately asked the boy what happened. Lu turned around, and with horror on his face, said that he could not contact the Tower of Magicians. The girl couldn't believe it, because it was impossible not to contact the Tower of Magicians. Lu confirmed his friend's words and said that he had been trying to contact them for some time. The boy also said that it could not have happened that the signalman had left somewhere, because if he left without a good reason, then his research expenses would be frozen for 3 months. The soldier quickly realized that something had happened, and this caused Lu to panic even more. Suddenly, a knight bursts into the guy's tent. Friends looked at him in surprise. And then, Kashiria asked the one what happened. The knight, trying to regain his breath, said that the prince asked the guys to come to him. A few minutes later, all the comrades were assembled. Kashiria was incredibly surprised when she heard that the capital could be captured. The prince, with inner experience, said that these were just guesses, but such a development of events could be quite real. Lu could not contain his emotions. He immediately asked the prince what happened to the Tower of Magic. The guy reluctantly said that if the enemies captured the capital, it would be a disaster. The man strongly hoped that the Archmage was able to escape from there safely. This news shocked Lu so much that he couldn't say a word. Our hero wondered who could have captured the capital. The guy assumed that it was the work of those terrible and merciless monsters. Suddenly, the prince offers to send someone to check whether the capital has actually been captured by enemies. As soon as Lu heard this, he immediately raised his hand and asked him to go and check it out. Kashiria immediately blew up and asked Lu to be quieter. But the boy could not sit idly by until he found out what had happened to his mentor. At this moment, a knight bursts into the room. He again wanted to tell the guys about the urgent news. The count looked at his subordinate strangely. And then, he heard the knight say that he saw monsters chasing some unknown knight. Standing still, the knight said that the one running away could belong to the Imperial Knight Guardians. As soon as the prince heard this, he immediately stood up sharply. And then he suggested that this knight was able to somehow get out of the capital. Count Lemesandro looked at the prince strangely. And then, he ordered the knight to tell the others that they must save that unknown knight from harm at any cost. Our hero realized that the capital had probably already been captured. And also, he realized that most likely he would not be able to meet with the Archmage. But despite this, Kong Chan hoped that everything was fine with the Archmage. At the same time, the count said that he would personally go and bring this escaped knight here. The prince heard the count's words and said that he would go with him. But the man warned the prince that it could be a trap, and therefore he should not go there. The prince would like to object to the count's words, but after a few seconds he realized that the man might be right, and so the prince did not say anything. Kashiria was at a loss. She still could not understand what was happening here. Lu was also in despair. He could not believe that the capital would fall so easily. The girl approached the prince and asked him not to worry, because as long as there were knights of the Imperial Guard, the emperor should be safe. The prince looked sadly at the floor and said that he believed that everything would be fine with his family. The soldier watched all this from the side. He was just thinking about this situation. The guy realized that the leaders must have managed to evacuate, but not everyone managed to escape safely from the palace. Our hero thought that in this case, if they at least had a telephone or a walkie-talkie, it would be several times easier for them to scout out the situation in the castle. Unexpectedly, Kashiria approached Kong Chan. She asked the guy what he was thinking about. The girl also asked the soldier his opinion about that knight who escaped from the castle. Our hero could not say anything about this. He only knew that the distance from here to the capital was quite large, and no one knew how this knight could get here. The guy suggested that it could all be a hoax. Kashiria was very surprised when she heard this. Kong Chan said that it would be very effective if their side used this method, but the opponents did it first. And then, Kashiria realized that if you don't know that this is a trick and don't defend yourself, then this could become a very painful mistake. The soldier confirmed the girl's words and said that this in itself was fatal. And then, Kong Chan said that there are several ways. You can pretend that the guys didn't know about the trap and secretly turn the situation around to attack the enemy. Also, it was possible to use all effective methods, for example information warfare. Hearing the thoughts of the main character, the prince thought a little. At the same time, Count Lemesandro, along with his knights, rushed to the aid of the escaped man. A few minutes after leaving, the count meets on his way a knight wandering through the deserted area, who could barely stand on his feet anyway. The knight, with sadness in his eyes, looked at the count as if at an angel. And then, the man suddenly sat down on his knee and greeted Count Lemesandro. From the conversation, we learn that the knight's name is Helishut. The count asked Helishut what he had in common with the knight Norman. Helishut said that it was his father, and then the count asked the man whether he had come with him. Helishut said with a trembling voice that his father took the prince and princess in the process of escaping from the imperial capital. Having learned this information, the count calmed down a little, and then he asked Helishut or the emperor if everything was fine. The man looked the count in the eyes and said that he definitely didn't know anything, because the emperor and the crown prince were accompanied by the knight Rissos. And everything was fine with the prince and princess. Hearing this, Count Lemesandro finally stops worrying about the safety of the royal family. However, at the moment, the castle was under siege, surrounded by enemies. Also, the castle was held under the leadership of Chris Allen. After the conversation, the count took Helishut with him, and a few minutes later they were already in the room where the friends were sitting. Helishut immediately rushed to the prince and greeted him, and then said that he had saved his brother and sister. The prince was incredibly grateful to the knight for his work. After this, the knight was released for a while to come to his senses. And at this time, the count gathered everyone again and said that Helishut had some ulterior motives. Kashiria asked the count if he meant that someone was using the knight. Lemesandro said that he doesn't know, and now they have to be incredibly careful. And when Kashiria heard the count's assumptions that the knight had come here for the prince, the girl became seriously angry. The prince, having analyzed the whole situation, asked the count whether this could be inevitable. Lemisandro said that everything was like that. However, now the comrades could not simply go into blindness. Kong Chan joined the conversation and asked his comrades what their thoughts were on this matter. A few hours later, Count Lemisandro gathered all the soldiers into one formation. He said that today, they were going to save the empress and princess from the evil cultists. And then, the count loudly asked the soldiers, those who were afraid to go into battle could come forward. He will not blame anyone for anything, and will not force the knights who went to war to go to war. After the count's words, absolutely no one came forward. The knights only shouted with pride and began to wait for Lemisandro's command. After that, the count and the prince looked at each other, and, without thinking twice, the prince gave a signal to the troops that they were moving out. Immediately after this command, the main character, as well as his friends and fearless warriors, rushed in the direction of the captured castle. That same morning, there was some noise in the castle. Enchanted people and dark knights walked around the fortress square, who were also under the spell of black magic. Somewhere on the side there was a catapult and a huge mobile tower, in case monsters attacked the castle. At this time, the knights were fussing and trying to finish preparing for the defense as quickly as possible. They had to finish all their work before sunset. Also, next to the knights there were wounded who needed help from the last siege. The princess watched all this from a high tower. It was incredibly painful for her to watch how her warriors worked and suffered for the good of the people. At this moment, the knight Ramesh approached the girl. He was very worried about whether they would be able to survive the next night. The girl, looking down, hoped that Helishut had met with Lemisandro, and he could convey his message to him. At this moment, Ramesh said that the princess could leave the castle with the prince at any time. The princess did not like the knight's words, because she could not leave poor people to their fate. Changing the topic, the girl asked Ramesh how many soldiers could join the battle. The man could not even imagine, because the fourth day of the siege was already underway, and there were fewer and fewer knights every day. Then, even the princess realized that it would not be easy for them to hold out even for a day. A few hours later, evening gradually came. Ramesh looked at the sunset and thought that most likely the soldiers would not come. The man came to terms with this and accepted this fate, with which he could no longer do anything or change anything. But even despite this, Ramesh still wanted at least the little prince to survive. At the same moment, the little prince was sitting in his room, guarded by a strong knight named Alan. The boy, with a trembling voice, asked Alan why the princess continued to walk towards the fortress wall. Alan looked at the boy strangely, and then he said that His Highness the princess cared very much about the common people. The boy was very worried, so much so that with every word he began to tremble. But despite this, the prince asked Alan whether his sister was not at all afraid of these monsters. Alan said that there are no people who are not afraid of them, and therefore, the sister went there in order to support her warriors. After this, the little prince asked Alan whether he was afraid of these evil and terrible monsters. The knight said that true courage is overcoming fear and taking a step forward. After his words, Alan sat down on his knee in front of the prince. And then, giving him his hand, he said that he had no doubt that the boy would one day become as brave as he was. Word after word, and after a while the sun sets. And when the sun completely hid behind the horizon, from the high towers of the castle one could see bright torches and lights, which were somehow held in their hands by monsters and monsters. They, together with the enchanted knights, advanced on the castle. Suddenly, one of the knights saw this very creepy picture. And after him, gradually the rest of the warriors began to watch the approach of an incredibly large army to their castle. The princess and the knight watched all this from a high watchtower. The knight immediately ordered his troops to prepare for the attack, as well as for the defense of the castle. After this command, the soldiers raised the flag, and they took their initially allocated positions. At one moment, all the shield bearers saw burning arrows flying straight at them. The soldiers were seriously frightened and began to protect their comrades and themselves with the help of large steel shields. Unfortunately, not everyone was able to survive the first attack, and therefore most of the warriors simply left this world. Also, those arrows that flew a little further than the defending gate accidentally set fire to some bags of supplies. Because of this, a fire started inside the castle, which the knights tried to put out no matter what. At the same time, the monsters tried to shoot at the knights with a catapult. One of them put a shell in a ladle, and as soon as the catapult was ready to launch, Bloody Mason approached it, and with a good swing, the monster cut the rope. And then, with incredible speed, the catapult fired a projectile directly at the brave defenders of the castle. The knights saw this, and immediately one of them ordered the guys to dodge and cover themselves. After these words, stone charges hit the castle directly. One of the knights fell into despair. He wanted to run away and leave the battlefield. And immediately after the second attack, the monsters began to attack even faster and do it even stronger. As soon as there were a few steps left to the castle, the monsters thought of putting up ladders and breaking through them. The knight ordered the rest of the soldiers not to give in to panic and fear, and not to fall into despair. After these words, the man, no matter what, threw down the ladder along which the monsters were climbing at that moment. The man ordered the soldiers to destroy all enemies and protect the castle from villains. When monsters attacked the castle, the knights defended themselves, but in the castle itself there was chaos and incredible panic. The little prince was also very worried, because at any moment, even a huge stone launched on a catapult could fly into his room. Alan stood quietly and guarded the boy. The man was ready, and if any situation occurred, he would immediately enter the battle and protect the young heir from harm. Through the window, the guys could see burning stone shells flying past. Such a picture brought tears to my eyes, and my soul became even more worried. These burning stone shells flew past the castle windows and hit the defenders directly. The princess watched all this from the highest tower. Such a picture brought tears to her eyes and her heart began to beat even faster. At that moment, Ramesh turned to her. He sincerely asked the princess to evacuate and hide inside the castle. The girl was shocked when she learned that the main gate of the castle had been broken through. Then, she sharply turned her head towards the gate, and the next thing she saw brought her into incredible shock. The girl saw how almost the entire castle was on fire, and in the main square, instead of knights, there were terrible monsters that practically destroyed all the defenders of the castle. Ramesh shouted from below for the princess to quickly leave here and hide somewhere. But the girl did not want to go anywhere, because she was very worried about the soldiers and the rest of the inhabitants of the castle. The knight said that now there was no time to think about it, and therefore the princess needed to quickly run away from there. Turning around, the girl heard soldiers and commanders shouting about saving her at any cost. Suddenly, the girl takes out her magic sword. And despite all her fears and worries, the princess jumps from a tall building to protect and help her wars. As soon as the girl landed, the soldiers were shocked and they saw the princess on the battlefield. Through huge flying shells, through many battles, the girl made her way and looked for a suitable opponent. Suddenly, the main gate of the castle was destroyed. The culprit for this was the Bloody Mason, who brought many more dark knights with him. The monster, despite everything, went forward and began to destroy the castle's soldiers. Civilians tried to save themselves and their lives. They ran away to where it was more or less safe. They ran away to where there was no fire and monsters. The princess saw all this. Tears welled up in her eyes from such a picture. Suddenly, all the wars heard a familiar howl. Ramesh drew attention to him, and from the words of his comrades he realized that help was rushing towards them. The princess was incredibly happy to hear this howl. A smile finally appeared on her face, and all the tears disappeared from her eyes. Now she had at least some hope of salvation. The girl ran straight to the main gate, where many battles with monsters were now taking place. The princess quickly climbed onto the main gate and began to look out for who was approaching them. Looking into the distance, the girl saw a very large army of soldiers approaching the castle on the horizon. Ramesh also climbed onto the main gate, and after looking only once, he realized that it was Count Lemesandro along with his team. The princess immediately understood everything, and immediately told the defender of the empire that Count Lemesandro had arrived. The girl also asked the soldiers not to give up and continue the battle with the enemies. Hearing this, the knights raised their weapons and began to shout with joy. The words of the princess increased their motivation. The girl turned around to continue to watch as her allies approached the castle. At the same time, Count Lemesandro and his army rushed with all their might to help the princess. Along the way, they destroyed a lot of dark knights and also bloody masons who blocked their path. After some time, the count's detachment burst inside the castle, and now all that remained was to destroy most of the monsters, which had practically captured the castle. The princess continued to watch the battle from the main gate. She saw how Helishut fought with vile and evil monsters, and when the guy made his way inside the castle, he tried to find the princess and Ramesh with his eyes. Suddenly, he heard his name being called from the main gate. Turning his head, he saw Ramesh. A few minutes later, Helishut rose to the princess, and on his knees, he greeted her. He said all his words. Helishut raised his head and saw something very terrible. Namely, the man saw behind the princess there was a dark knight who swung his sword at her and wanted to hit her. Helishut and Ramesh noticed this very late, and it seemed that the end had come for the princess. And as soon as she turned around, you saw a magic bullet pierce the monster's head. The princess looked in the direction of the shot, and there she saw the main character, who, sitting on a horse, calmly destroyed this monster. During the battle, the towers on which the Dark Knights stood began to gradually fall and be destroyed. The monsters fell to the ground with spears in their chests. After a few minutes, they immediately left this world. Lu was incredible as always, using his very strong magic to help the soldiers and his friends. Kashiria also did not stand aside. She destroyed the bloody masons one after another with very simple and easy movements of her hands. Count Lemisandro also helped his comrades and his soldiers in this battle. The princess watched what was happening. She was delighted that the knights were gradually succeeding, and with every minute there were fewer and fewer monsters. As soon as there were no monsters left, the girl raised her sword up, showing that they had won this war. The knights standing below began to rejoice and shout. They were incredibly glad that this torment and this suffering was finally over. The prince looked at his sister in surprise. He was also glad that this night would pass peacefully. After some time, the friends entered the castle. Accompanied by the prince and princess, the comrades went to the secret room to discuss the next tactics for the attack. As soon as the friends approached the room, its doors immediately opened. A joyful little prince ran out of the room. Alan followed him. At that time he was catching up with him, and asked the boy not to run around the castle, because it was very dangerous for him. As soon as the prince met his younger brother, he immediately rushed to him and began to hug him. The guys had not seen each other for a very long time, and so they stood and hugged for a few more minutes. After some time, the comrades came to a special meeting room, and having laid out a model of the castle, the prince and Ramesh began to discuss battle tactics. Ramesh, holding a pointer in his hands, said that the monsters will not give up just like that. The count said that the monsters probably pursued the princess and the little prince all the way from the capital to this castle. Moreover, as soon as the monsters find out that the prince has also joined the group, they will definitely not retreat for anything. Ramesh said that this matter was already serious, because this news should have reached even the king himself. The main character watched all this. He knew that strengthening the troops was a natural procedure. If the guys strengthen the troops, then they will definitely hold out once or twice, but if the monsters don't stop and continue to attack, then the castle will definitely not survive. At the same time, the princess helped the surviving people who needed her help. The girl stood with a tray and distributed fresh pieces of bread to all the people. There were also guards around the entire perimeter. They closely watched so that enemies would not appear on the horizon again, and this doomsday night would not continue. Kong Chan thought that as a last resort, they would have to leave the inhabitants of the castle and leave this place. But he knew that this would never happen. The prince and the knights could not come up with any tactics. The count said that the number of enemies is one of the problems. According to Baron Ramesh's report, the castle was short of supplies. The prince laughed nervously and then said that if the next attack was the same as today, then how could the knights hold out? Ramesh looked at the map and thought. He understood that even 2 attacks would be the limit. Then Kashiria joins the conversation. She said that given the situation, the next attack will be much more serious than today's. The prince knew that this was a huge problem, and then he asked if they had enough arrows. Ramesh said that he sent soldiers from the castle to collect arrows from outside and repair broken weapons. Suddenly, our hero offers to attack the monsters first, and not tomorrow or in a week, but right now. Count Lemisandro looked at the guy strangely. And then he said that the battle had just ended, and all the soldiers were tired, some of them were wounded. First of all, the count was wondering whether the soldiers would even listen to him. The prince and the main character looked at each other. And then the man asked Kong Chan about his thoughts or suggestions for the next attack. The soldier assumed that the monsters must have been as tired as they were. Because they go crazy because nothing always works out for them. As a result of the conversation, the Count asks our hero whether he wanted to say that there is no more hope. Suddenly, the prince turns to the guy, and he asks our hero to explain his plan in more detail. The main character puts his hands on the table, and picking up a pointer, the guy begins to explain his plan and his tactics. The prince and Ramesh were incredibly surprised, because from our hero's explanations they learned that this was one very well-known tactic that was used by the German army. Namely, the so-called Blitzkrieg. As it turned out, the Count, like everyone else, did not know about this tactic. Kong Chan explained to his comrade that this was a strategy to break into the enemy camp with one blow using quick maneuvers and surprise. The prince still didn't understand anything. He asked our hero to once again explain this plan to him in more detail. Pointing to a model of the castle, the soldier said that the key to operations is speed. First, the infantry quickly line up from the castle and attack the main gate. Next, our hero again tells his friends about another fairly well-known operation, prepared by the Germans based on the experience of the failure of Napoleon. Then, Kenchan placed the counters and, using their example, showed how the soldiers should move and move. It was important that all the actions of the knights were derived and made like the movements of gears. And if everything goes right, they will be able to deal a heavy blow to their enemies. Kashiria and Lemisandro looked at the model in surprise and thought about what they had just heard. Alan looked around strangely and saw. Both the prince and the baron were in thought. Suddenly Lemisandro said that he understood everything, and then he asked the soldier whether everything should definitely work out. The guy said that he knew little about this world, but from what he saw, the speed of the knights was almost the same as that of the armored personnel carrier. Perhaps this plan could actually be implemented. Lemisandro asked Kong Chan what an armored personnel carrier was, and the guy told the Count to introduce a van made of steel. It was durable, and could also fire magic projectiles. Kashiria and Lemisandro were in incredible shock, because they could not even imagine that such a thing already existed somewhere. After some time, the Count and the Prince go out into the corridor. After reviewing the script several times, the Count realizes that if they do everything as Kong Chan said, then they have a chance of winning. The Prince, having thought about all this, said that the damage would also not be small. The Count also said that they needed to win this war, because with such a strategy it was shameful to lose. After all this, the prince switches the topic and says that he lacks the abilities of his father, and therefore he asks the Count to protect him in case of danger. Lemisandro was surprised to hear this. And then, he asked the prince what Captain Khan was like. After a short conversation, Count Lemisandro met with Baron Ramesh. Ramesh asked the Count what they would do. Lemisandro was going to carry out the operation proposed by the main character. Ramesh heard this and said that his plan sounded like speed and coordination were the most important thing there. Lemisandro tapped his foot loudly, thereby hinting to the Baron to keep quiet for a while. And then the Count asked the Baron why he was telling him about this now. The Count had no doubt about Romi's loyalty. And he also wondered if there was any point in being afraid of a stranger. After all, now they were at the crossroads of choosing between whether to live on or be destroyed. However, now it was extremely important to make the right choice, because after making it, there would be no turning back. Hearing the Count's criticism, Ramesh apologized for his words and said that it was a misunderstanding. Also, the man said that he would do everything possible to make the operation a success, and they won this battle. At the same time, the princess was in her room and looked out the window at the sky. The prince suddenly approached her and told the girl that she needed at least a little more sleep. The guy also came to the window and said that about 2 months had passed. The girl could not understand what her brother was talking about. Then, the prince said that looking at this night sky, he remembered her birthday last year. The girl smiled sweetly, also remembering warm memories of this day. The sky they looked at that night remained the same, but now the guys are far from the capital, in this place. The guy turns his head sharply and tells his sister that the Empress and Emperor got out of the capital, and everything was fine with them, but there was one thing. Hearing this, the princess immediately began to squeeze her dress and get very nervous, waiting for what her brother would tell her now. Under terrible and terrible memories, the girl's tears begin to flow. She covered her face with her hands, crying because she imagined what would have happened if they had not left the capital. The brother saw this and instantly hugged his sister to calm her down. A few hours later, all preparations were ready, and the knights had to set off. The soldiers, by order of the count, stood in formation and awaited the next commands. Once everything was ready, the squad leader said that the squad at the main gate was ready. The knights began to raise flags, thereby signaling the readiness of the troops. When absolutely all the troops were ready, the prince raised a special pointer and thereby gave a sign to the rest of the soldiers. After this, the main gates began to slowly open, so that later the troops could be released from the castle. And as soon as everything was ready, all the soldiers left the castle and headed to strike back at the monsters. After some time, the knights approached the enemy fortress. The Dark Knights were incredibly surprised when they saw enemies on the horizon. They immediately ran to their leader and told him that there was about to be an enemy attack. The leader abruptly stood up and ran out into the street to see what was happening there. His surprise knew no bounds when he saw that everything around him was on fire, and on the territory of the castle there were knights from another kingdom. The knights on Kong Chan's side attacked the monsters, not giving them the opportunity to somehow resist. The entire army was commanded by Count Lemisandro. He bravely directed troops towards the enemies, and he acted according to the tactics of the protagonist. The archers fired flaming arrows at the monsters, just as they had recently fired them at the human fortress. There were thousands of soldiers around the castle who were awaiting further command for a surprise attack on the fortress. After some time, outside the castle, several detachments gathered together, on the orders of Count Lemisandro. At the same moment, for some reason the leader of the monsters was lying on the ground. 2 soldiers saw this and immediately ran to their commander to help. And at that moment, the archers spotted them, and without any hesitation they fired fiery arrows at the monsters. From this, they had no place to run, and therefore the Dark Knights relied only on their armor, but it was of little use. Experienced magic knights were also present in the battle. They used their incredibly powerful magic to destroy opponents with fire. There was chaos in the castle square, and mobile installations burned to the ground, since no one could extinguish them. The prince watched what was happening from the side with caution. Even before this attack, Lemisandro asked the protagonist who would give the signal for the final attack on the castle. The guy, without thinking twice, said that inside the fortress the commander of the operation would continue to monitor the situation, and if something happened, he would give a signal. The count was at a loss. He thought that all this did not make sense, since at that time, the sun would not rise yet, and therefore it would be difficult for the soldiers to see anything. Kong Chan said that even from this situation there was one way out, which even the count himself did not know about. The guy said that a torch or fire arrows would be enough, but when Kong Chan suggested that it would be pitch dark at that time, he thought about it. Lemisandro suggested putting many magicians in one circle and ordering them, with the help of magic, to illuminate the sky with bright lights, but even this idea did not inspire confidence. Suddenly, our hero takes out his magic bullet, and then asks his comrades if they have heard anything about the flashbang. The prince looked towards the castle, from where a special cartridge was about to fire any minute. Meanwhile, at the fortress, Count Lemisandro gives a signal to Kanchan, who is sitting next to him. Even before accepting the idea, Lu suggested to the sniper that he make this bomb with a slight modification. The boy very much hoped that his new cartridge would work and their idea would be brought to life. A few seconds later, Kong Chan fires a specially enchanted bullet into the air. She flew several hundred meters up. And then, upon reaching a certain height, the bullet explodes and forms something like the sun. This so-called sun illuminated absolutely the entire castle, and thanks to this, all the knights were able to see this signal. Once the signal has been given, Count Lemisandro gives another signal to his archers. And they, after a few seconds, pull the arrows and launch them upward in order to notify the troops behind the walls that they can begin clearing. As soon as the signal was received, the troops immediately entered the castle and began to destroy the monsters one by one. The leader of the Dark Knights shouted, ordering them to attack the people and defend the fortress. And all this difficult battle took place under the bright light of a specially enchanted cartridge. Unexpectedly, bloody masons began to appear on the battlefield. One of them was immediately destroyed by the protagonist's bullet. Also, Kashiria joined the battle. With rage in her eyes, she destroyed her enemies without sparing them. When the girl turned around and looked menacingly at the Dark Knights, the monsters were incredibly frightened by the confident and angry look of the girl. But Kashiria did not want to bother with them for a long time, and therefore, the girl immediately attacked the Dark Knights. And then, she immediately destroyed them, making the monsters regret that they began to resist. The rest of the Dark Knights who watched this from the side were very frightened of the girl, and when she was busy, they tried to escape from her. At the same moment, the soldiers shouted that their comrades should not let anyone go, and not give anyone the slightest chance to escape. The knights calmly destroyed absolutely all the monsters that they encountered on their way. Lu also did this. He, along with other magicians, provided incredible support to his friends from the outside. The prince also did not stand aside, he was in the role of leader and commanded the rest of the troops. And Kashiriat destroyed the monsters one by one, not giving them a chance to escape. The main character watched all this from the tower. It was very interesting for him to watch this battle. After watching for some more time, Kong Chan tells Count Lemisandro that the critical moment seems to have been passed. The count looked at the soldier in surprise. After some time, the battle was over. And as soon as all the surviving monsters were tied up, the knights began to rejoice and celebrate their difficult victory. And then, one of them took the destroyed enemy flag, and he began, as a joke, to wave them to the shouts of joyful soldiers. The prince was also incredibly happy about this victory. At that moment Count Lemisandro drove up to him and said that this victory was thanks to the prince. But the guy didn't think so. He looked at the main character and said that only he deserved these words. The next morning, residents returned to the castle, and life in this fortress was revived again. The prince, looking at all this, said that they would rest a little and then leave the fortress. Suddenly, Ramesh comes to the guys. He tried to object to the count. Lemisandro was already a little tired of all this, and he asked the baron whether they had not finished this conversation. Ramesh turned away, and then asked the count if they could continue fighting in this castle, because the man understood that it would take 3 days to travel from here to another estate. Lemisandro bowed his head and said that such an opportunity could not be missed, because they did not know who exactly the leader of their enemies was. And then, waving his head, the man said that they had to get out of here at any cost, because it was pointless to fight the enemy in this territory. The prince said that the count was telling the truth. He also said that they need to leave this place. And then, the prince asked his comrades to look at the people. Looking at them, the prince knew that this was the limit of what they could withstand. And if the guys don't continue, then most likely the castle will collapse from the inside. Ramesh laughed and then asked the prince or the people would revolt. The guy said that wasn't the case. A second later, realized that it was about food. At the same time, some girl went down into the dungeon of this castle. She opened the heavy wooden door slightly and then entered the room. The girl in the robe found a table with a nightstand. Opening the nightstand, the girl took a magic ball from there. She carefully placed it on the pillow and then began to contact someone. As it turned out, it was the princess. She was telling someone to go to the Viscount's estate and cross the Web Mountains. Someone from the ball said that the final destination would be the castle of Count Lemisandro, and as soon as they reached it, unknown people would contact the princess. Finally, the girl said that she offered her soul to the humble fire. And as soon as she uttered these words, the conversation on the magic ball was over. And after a few seconds, the princess comes to her senses. On the same day, after lunch, the army left this castle. As soon as the prince waited for the last night, Count Lemisandro blew the horn and gave the signal that they were leaving. A few seconds later, a large squad of knights moved forward. In the carriage that rode in the middle, the little prince and the princess were sitting, protected by Alan. The boy looked out of the carriage window and in the distance he saw the main character. The princess wondered why her brother was looking at someone for so long, and then she also looked out the window. And I saw Kong Chan, who was riding with Kashiria and discussing something. The army had already been walking non-stop for several hours straight through the hot and incredibly dangerous desert. The knights, despite the unbearable heat, continued to move forward, and take with you, in special carts, local residents from the castle. The princess, sitting in a luxurious carriage, asked Alan whether everything would be fine. The man said that since Count Lemisandro had come so far, there was no longer any doubt about the danger. The man also said that the estate was too far away. However, the chase is not visible, therefore, it is safe to say that in the next 2 days, no one will catch up with the army. Hugging her younger brother, the princess immediately calmed down when she heard that everything would be fine. At this moment, the tattoo on her wrist began to glow strangely. At the same moment, reconnaissance abruptly stopped. They immediately returned back and reported to the commanders that there was a dense forest ahead. Lemesandro looked at the prince and said that it would be nice if they rested a little before entering the forest. The count immediately gave the command and ordered all the soldiers to stop. At the same place, the army built a small camp. And in the middle of this camp, a fire was lit, around which all the most important people were sitting, including our hero. All the guys looked at each other. And then, Lemesandro suggests turning off one of the suspects. Our hero says that there is truth in the count's words, but only for people, it will do more harm than good. Hearing this, the count thinks for a moment, and then says that so be it. Then the prince joins the conversation and asks Kong Chan if this method will work. The soldier could not give the prince an exact answer, but he also could not ignore it. Next, the conversation turns to some kind of spy, because if it weren't for him, the monsters would definitely not have pursued the prince and princess. Kashiria was incredibly angry at the monsters because they were able to take over even the capital. Our hero heard her. He said that this was the whole essence of the war. Namely, to win by any means and methods. The guy also said that if the prince and princess could be captured, their value would be greater than that of ordinary captives. The prince said that they would have to find the spy among them faster than they could enter the Viscount's castle. Suddenly, Lemesandro asks our hero to tell him how they can catch the spy. The guy was silent at first, and then he said that he would definitely tell everything after the meal. The next morning, the army set out again. The guide said that as soon as the intelligence signal arrives, the other knights should block the other side and leave the forest as quickly as possible. And if someone falls behind, or loses sight of the guide, we can assume that he was destroyed. Immediately after this, the guide rushed forward with all his might, and the rest of the knights had to keep up with him. At this time, the princess looked at all this strangely. A few seconds later, the main entrance to the forest itself was already visible. The knights immediately jumped straight into it, and without slowing down, they continued to run along it. Lu flew up to Kashiria and asked her whether there really was some kind of trap here. The girl said that if they weren't there, then everything would be great. She also said that until now everything happened as Kong Chan said. Lu was worried that if something happened, many people and soldiers could die here. Previously, Kong Chan was describing the forest area, and said that if they reached a certain area, and there were no traps before it, then the chance of them increasing. The guy explained that scouts would ride in front of them, and if someone had not discovered the trap, they would release a green light, but if there was an enemy there, a red light would fly into the sky. Suddenly, the count asked the soldier what if the monsters also used this tactic. To this question, our hero just smiled and remained silent. Lu asked the girl again if this plan would work. Kashiria asked the boy not to worry, because Kong Chan spoke confidently, and therefore there should be no doubt about his plan. During the conversation, the guys notice how green appears in the sky. The soldiers turned sharply towards the released lantern and immediately ran there. Suddenly, one of the soldiers saw something. He pointed at it with his finger. As it turned out, 3 more of these green lanterns were released into the sky. But when the guys saw a red lantern in front of them, they immediately began to suspect that something was wrong. And then, the main character raised his device to release the lantern. And as soon as he fired, a new, blue lantern appeared in the sky.